1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
For an American child playing with a plastic figurine, the Made in China stamp means relatively nothing. To the working age adult, though, it means a multitude of things. That plastic figurine is representative of what is occurring in America and other developed nations with a wide range of goods. The flattening of the world has a positive impact overall, but there are aspects of it that are detrimental to the countries of the world. Outsourcing labor is a practice used by different countries to reduce costs by transferring portions of work to outside suppliers rather than completing it internally. It's the most basic manner of flattening the world. The practice of outsourcing labor began in the 1980s with Texas Instruments in India. The first Indian Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, set up the Indian Institutes of Technology, which provided a rigorous engineering education. The results of the IIT were hundreds of thousands of engineers who could work for significantly less than their American counterparts. Once Manmohan Singh, the Indian finance minister, loosens government regulations, American businesses flocked to India. For the first time, the ability was there and the labor was cheaper. America outsources most of its labor to places like China, Malaysia, and especially India. In doing so, jobs are provided for the people in those countries where poverty is more prevalent and more severe than it is in the United States. It also enables goods to be sold for less in the United States because the labor is less expensive. For example, Indians could type a book by hand into computers for $50 a month, as opposed to $1,000 a month in the United States. The outsourcing of labor brings jobs to developing countries because they have the same knowledge and skill as Americans, but they can work for much less. The outsourcing of labor does much more than decrease prices of goods and bring jobs. It promotes peace between countries. Violent conflict is much more likely to be avoided between countries that are economically linked. Thomas Friedman named this belief the Golden Arches Theory in his book, The World is Flat. He found that countries had a network of McDonald's have never once fought wars between each other. Now that most countries have a network of McDonald's, Friedman has updated his theory, now called the Dell Theory of Conflict Prevention. The Dell Theory of Conflict Prevention states that no two countries that are part of a major global supply chain, like Dell's, will ever fight a war against each other as long as they are both part of the same global supply chain. The flattening of the world promotes peace between countries because in a flat world are no longer independent but linked, so therefore do not want to lose the business of other countries by engaging in war with them. Although there is a great upside in the flattening of the world, it's not been fully achieved, and that has negative impacts. According to the article Globalization of R&D, recent changes in the management of innovation in transnational corporations, the globalization of nearly all things is still limited to developed countries. While the developed countries receive the labor, the decisions are still being made by developed countries. That, in turn, widens the gap between the rich and the poor. In India, where outsourcing began and the high-tech sector has thrived, there are still hundreds of millions of people still living in extreme poverty. The people working in the high-tech sector account for only 0.2% of employment, and with the people manufacturing and exports added, it still only accounts for 2% of the employment. That small percentage causes unrest among those who are not employed in the high-tech sector, who are still struggling to live. The success of the high-tech sector draws away from the issues that the majority of Indians face. As Lolita Law, president of a school of untouchables, says, yes, the middle and upper classes are taking off, but the 700 million who are left behind, all they see is gloom and despair. The success in India is a good thing, but is also a false representation of the whole population. It draws attention away from the things that need to be done. And it is not only India that faces such issues. According to the Princeton University-sponsored article, Distributional Effects of Globalization in Developing Countries, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil experienced a growing wage instability during the early 1980s and early 1990s, when those countries felt the greatest effects of globalization due to the lifting of certain trade restrictions, as evidenced by this graph. The outsourcing of labor provides jobs for people in foreign countries, but it takes away jobs from people in the developed countries. The gap between the rich and the poor in developing countries is greater than in developed countries, but the outsourcing of labor is widening that gap in developed countries. In those foreign countries, those who receive jobs become much richer, while in the developed countries, most of those jobs are left for people who have an education and a high skill level. The effect of globalization in a developed country is similar to that in a developing country. The rich prosper, and the poor flounder. The flattening of the world has many positive outcomes. booming economy, better international relations, but it also has many negative aspects. Widening gap between rich and poor, negligence of other struggling people in your own country. The negative impacts of the flattening the world are often a result of the country's own actions, such as a corrupt government, instead of a flaw in globalization. The world would end up a better, safer place if it became flat, with all countries being linked and dependent on each other to produce goods. It's a monumental challenge to globalize the world, but a challenge that is worth undertaking.